Hello and welcome to Talking Bottom. I'm Paul Tanter.
I'm Matt Brooks.
I'm Ange Pearson.
And we're back for a very special series to commemorate the 30th anniversary of Bottom. As we come to you, it's the exact 30th anniversary since the first episode of Bottom went out.
Is commemorate the right word? Because, commiserate, remember. We're here to remember. Commemorate doesn't mean that suggests they died or something, does it?
We're here to pay tribute to the show that is exactly 30 years old today.
That's definitely not something that someone would say in a funeral paying tribute to. I think we're good.
We're honouring the fact that it's the 30th anniversary.
As we record this, we're currently writing the book, Talking Bottom, A Guide to the Cult Sitcom, which, depending on when you're listening, is either available to pre-order now on the Unbound website or is available just to buy on any website that sells books or in any bookshop.
I can't fathom seeing it in a bookshop. That would be amazing, wouldn't it? Mm-hmm. But I wasn't born when Bottom come out. Why would I be interested? What if someone says this? How annoying is that? That comes up so often now. It also happens with the young ones. Oh, I wasn't born when it came out. Oh, have you heard of Shakespeare?
Yeah.
Fucking idiot.
Point being, comedy should last through the test of time, and the brilliant thing about Bottom is that, there were a few topical little names of politicians, etc., but it is long-lasting because it is about physical comedy, slapstick. Like, lots of their jokes are actually timeless because it's about a relationship between the odd couple that is Richie and Eddie.
Slapstick is something that comes up very often with Bottom. We've said several times it's unfairly dismissed as just slapstick. But we're going to lean into that this episode and talk about just the physical comedy stuff, which isn't just the slapstick, beating and violence. It's also falling about a bit and hitting your head. Exactly.
Each episode we're going to look at a different theme or aspect that is quite important to Bottom, such as the costumes or class and poverty, that kind of thing. But this week, it's physical comedy. So, physical comedy, a form of comedy focused on manipulation of the body for humorous effect. Like many things that have been hastily researched, physical comedy goes all the way back to ancient Greece and Rome, where slapstick was a popular form of mime in the theatres of the day. From the 16th to the 18th century...
I need to jump in there for slapstick.
Go on.
Do you know the term slapstick actually comes from a physical stick that was like two sticks kind of together so it like had a gap in between, and you'd like whip it and it would make a whack sound, and then so it looks like you hit someone, and that so it would be a physical tool to whack, and you so for the performance before special effects and things. That was an early special effects, the slapstick. That's where the term comes from.
The first sound effect.
Yeah,
just pass me a pen. I'll just cross that bit off the intro that I'm just reading at the moment.
But
no worries. Yeah. Okay,
I haven't got any notes.
From the 16th to the 18th century, commedia dell'arte, known to the British as Italian comedy, was a popular form of theatre and the origins of what went on to become pantomime. Circuses have similarly existed in one form or another since ancient Rome. But the images that stick in our collective minds when someone says physical comedy are the ones made famous through the 20th century thanks to the invention and popularity of film and television. Everyone can picture Harold Lloyd dangling from a clock face, a house collapsing around Buster Keaton, Charlie Chaplin getting churned through the factory gears in modern times, Stan Laurel pushing Oliver Hardy off a roof, and of course, Rick Mayall and Adrian Emerson savagely beating a helpless gas man to death with their fists in a frying pan.
It's not quite to death though, is it? But yeah, absolutely.
Nearly. I should note here that while the all-encompassing title of physical comedy does represent all the strands, such as mime, clowning, pantomime and funny faces, it's fair to say that what we'll be discussing here will be mainly physical stunts and slapstick.
They are very much stage performers, Rick and Aid, aren't they? Originally.
Yeah.
They don't use camera tricks and stuff with any of their things. They're doing those stunts.
Oh yeah, they're doing it live. Their sketches were inherently for the stage to go in front of a live audience.
They started on stage obviously as 20th Century Coyote and the Dangerous Brothers, and they would do a lot of physical stuff on stage where you can't rely on any kind of camera tricks or editing or special effects or anything like that. And even when they then went on to do more things that involved pyrotechnics and breakables and things as the Dangerous Brothers, there was never any relying on edits or tricks or anything like that. They would just often, when you watch the Dangerous Brothers skits, that a lot of which are on YouTube, the entire thing is played out in one uninterrupted cut to one camera, just doing a wide of the stage, doesn't it?
Yeah, more or less.
They're doing their own stunts, and that's what is amazing about, obviously, the Towering Inferno skit from the Dangerous Brothers. For anyone who hasn't seen that, you should really go and look it up on YouTube. It's famous in that Aid actually sets himself on fire quite quite literally and forgets his safe word, doesn't he? And like the danger that was going on, they're called the Dangerous Brothers. So you watch it and you're like, oh, ha, 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 and then there's like a screen freeze, isn't there?
Yeah,
It
and he
comes on,
comes
and
on
it's
and
like,
explains something
uh-oh,
went
you know,
wrong.
and it's
Yeah.
very much like, oh, you know, there's been another fuck up, isn't there? Pure risks they were taking is something that it feels like people shy away from now. I wonder whether it is to do with the bravery of it. Because if you do go back to like Stan Laurel and Hardy and all of the Buster Keaton and before that Charlie Chaplin, and I think, you know, there must have been these things going on stage in the Vaudeville Theatre and, you know, obviously music hall here in the UK, and once it moved to silent film became just what they did. I was reading that, you know, they did their stunts because they didn't know anything but that. They weren't stuntmen.
It wasn't an idea of the stunt, didn't
Yeah, you know, it was like, of course you're just going to do your own stunt because you've written the funny bit and you're going to, you know, go careering downhill in a car or, you know, whatever it is.
But that's what the show is. What do you mean? You'd have someone else doing it? What?
Yeah, the
It's like
idea
that.
of a stuntman. I don't know whether Rick and Aid ever felt that way, but, you know, I think if you were the performer, feel a little bit like you're being cheated out of being able to do it yourself.
I suppose so.
Due to health and safety or whatever reason, because I think, is it Aid only ever used it when he's crashing through the roof in Burglary?
Obviously, Rick and Aid are our frames of reference here for a lot of the physical comedy, but let's try and paint a bigger canvas of what people think of and see as physical comedy in modern culture. So some things that sort of came to mind that I listed down, that if I say them, people would go, oh yeah, in films they often do a lot of physical comedy, are examples such as Peter Sellers in the Pink Panther films, The Three Stooges, Kramer in Seinfeld, Norman Wisdom, Steve Martin, Martin Short, Chevy Chase, Jim Carrey, Jerry Lewis, Benny Hill, bit of stuff that in some British comedy such as Eddie and Patsy and Ab Fab, even the Chuckle Brothers, a lot of that's physical comedy.
Oh, well, you go, what's the snobbishness of saying even the Chuckle Brothers?
Because
you
I know there is an inherent snobbishness about that. I mean, often people sort of look down on kids' comedy, but actually there's a lot of inventiveness that does go into it. And in other sitcoms, things that might come to mind would be three old men rolling down hills in a bathtub on wheels in Last of the Summer Wine. But other ones where it's really baked into the DNA of the show, much like Bottom, would be Mr. Bean, which is a great example of physical comedy, and we'll be talking about Rowan Atkinson a bit here. And something that, again, people would probably find a bit cheesy is Some Mothers Do Have Them.
Yeah, I was waiting to have that in my back pocket to say, oh, well, you've forgotten about this, but you hadn't. Yeah, the roller skates going underneath the truck, that's how dangerous that looks. He does it so well.
Yeah, the timing on that. I mean, if he'd fucked up the timing, he would at worst be dead, at very best probably just have a broken neck. But there's just some great physical stunts in that.
Did you hear the story about that one where he spoke to the writers about that episode and he's like, just do a bunch of stuff and then get me on roller skates at the end? That was his note.
Right, I didn't know that. No.
And then I'll do some stuff.
The other form of physical comedy where you can see things that are often quite elaborate would be in animation, because it's possible to do anything there with that, and the actors' input is only restricted to their voices, so there's no danger to them. But in preparation for this, I was watching last week, I was on YouTube, I was looking for physical comedy, and on BritBox's YouTube channel, BritBox, the channel that sells or shows British TV
Sponsored by BritBox
through America, they had a compilation of best slapstick moments on there.
Yeah, I watched that.
So I watched it, and I thought, this is going to, if this is British TV and it's best slapstick, it's going to mainly be full of the young ones and Bottom. It can't be anything else.
Can I guess some moments that happened?
They had nothing from Rick and Aid in there.
I'll precurse this by saying, obviously, they are going to want to promote the shows they have on their channel. And if they're not running Bottom or Young Ones, then they won't include it in there, because what's the point? But yes, so Ange, you've seen it as well. So
they might not even have permissions, actually, thinking about it. But it was outrageous of the title of that video, wasn't it? To say, you know, the
best ever
include British humour
from our library.
So with that in mind, knowing there's no Bottom or Young Ones, BritBox is from ITV, BBC and Channel 4. They all combine to perform this online platform.
Sure. I'm going to guess Del Boy falling through the bar as one of the moments.
You know what?
I think that was in one video I watched. I don't know if it was that one.
Yes.
Because it has to be.
Yes, that one was in there. Del Boy falling through the bar. Okay. Yes, that was. Yeah, go on.
Only Fools and Horses as well.
Go on.
With the chandelier.
That was not in there.
All right.
That clip, I remember, is always used in a BBC comedy promo, which has a lot of other clips in. Yeah.
Mr. Bean.
There was two from Mr. Bean.
Yeah.
One was him...
Chicken on the head.
I think that was one of them,
The turkey,
Yeah.
Which Friends stole.
Which Friends did steal. Didn't even change it a bit.
No, I know.
Well, it wasn't stuck on her head. It was just, hey, look, it's on my head to make you laugh. To make you laugh, Chandler. Oh,
Well, no,
dance.
so Joey
gets it stuck on it.
does it,
Yeah.
and then Monica does it.
Oh,
It's a
that's
different
right,
way
because it
in
was a
which
flashback of
they handle
Joey
it.
getting it on his head.
Remember,
and
Joey
it's-
has it on his head, and she says, "I'm going to spread the legs," and he laughs whilst inside the turkey. Go on. Something else from Mr. Bean.
Gonna guess him cutting up the Robert Lion and knocking it over.
It was him driving his car while on top of his car.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
does he on his car on an armchair driving it
That's
with
right,
mops?
with some sort of pulley system.
Yeah.
Okay.
It was
Fantastic.
Sure.
What else?
Oh, well, how many am I going to get?
Are you out of ideas now, Matt?
Okay.
So I am running
Right,
fine. Right, so
If I was to say
can you give me a show and then I'll...
Vicar of Dibley.
Okay, yes, 100%. It's her going in the little puddle that's actually a deep little puddle.
Yeah.
It's a rule of 3, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a jump into 2 that are quite shallow,
Yeah.
and then...
So where's the
really
rule
deep
of
one.
3? The rule of 3 is definitely a physical comedy trope, for want of a better word, that's been there from the beginning.
It's not only physical, it's wordy as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Rule of-
The way 3 works is the first one tells you what's happening. The second one thinks we're establishing a pattern.
Yeah.
And the third one subverts the expectation of the pattern we've
It's
set
a
up.
surprise, so
Yeah.
you laugh.
You
Yeah.
can do it with just 2, but for whatever reason, they found out 3 is funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's a weird thing, because you're there, you're like set up, and then the punch comes, and you're like, oh, I wasn't actually predicting that, so it gets
Yeah.
you. But
But-
the element of surprise is something that we'll talk about probably a little
Yeah.
bit later. But that is a key element of all physical
Yeah.
comedy, isn't it? The element of surprise and comedy in general.
So, Ange, do you remember what the other clips in this particular video were?
I distinctly remember the hyacinth bouquet one from Keeping Up Appearances.
Now, there's
what?
2 clips from Keeping Up Appearances.
Yeah.
Which one are you referring to?
Well, the one in the boat
Yeah.
is obviously kind of, you just know what's going to happen from the moment it starts. So anyway, for the listeners' benefit, it's Hyacinth and Richard. She's leaving in a boat from the side of what I presume is some sort of Norfolk Broads kind of canal, whatever they're in, and he's trying to run and get into the boat, and of course it leaves the side, and he's like left flailing behind trying to like jump into the boat, and then of course he ends up in the water, and it's like, Richard, get in the boat, all that.
How do you
And
write
then,
that?
How do you think that
come
scene
up with
ends?
that?
Obviously Hyacinth then falls in the water, and hilarity, but the audience are going mental for it.
I
which
suppose
found
That's just
amazing.
like you've been
But,
friends, but writing a sketch of you being, and then if someone falls over a little bit.
But the point being, so there's that, and then there's also a bit of the dog, isn't there?
Yeah, again, rather than Richard being pulled along by the boat, it's Hyacinth being pulled along by a dog
By a
that she
dog,
can't
yeah,
control.
a huge dog that
Yeah.
is just obscene. Of course, she's running past the neighbours, isn't she? So she's trying to keep up appearances, and I don't have a problem with keeping up appearances. I'm just going to say that now. I think Patricia Routledge is an absolute hero of physical comedy. I don't look down on it whatsoever. I think she was incredible. Like, I genuinely do think that was a great comedy character. There shouldn't be 2 clips of that in there above and beyond bottom, obviously, which is why it was kind of like, why are there 2 clips from this?
Yeah.
But I think we've hit the nail on the head that obviously BritBox own the rights to it. But yeah, no, I don't have any problem with keeping up appearances. I feel like you were going to dive in and maybe say that you don't think it should be in there at all, which I would disagree with.
Is it physical comedy really though? Is that an example
it's
of
the inherent...
Isn't
What
it
do you
that?
mean?
Isn't that not writing and the situation? Isn't that not a situation? That's sitcom stuff of her being embarrassed. That's what's funny. The embarrassment. It's not
No, but
the
she's-
actual dog. Is that
So
funny?
you'd have to watch it, but there's very physical humour in there, in that she's trying to obviously keep this dog under control, and she's going along the road at a breakneck kind of speed, trying to keep upright, and her entire body language is very funny. It's very well done.
I think I've hit the nail on the head that this episode is going to struggle with. We're describing physical things on the radio.
Yeah, well,
Well, I was listening to a podcast earlier by it's a blind guy who does like various different podcasts, and he was talking about sight gags and how he struggles with watching comedy that obviously has a lot of physical or visual humour in there, because of course it wouldn't be funny to you if you can't see it. And that, for me, I was like, oh, imagine if you hadn't been able to ever watch Rick and Aid or any physical humour happening and really know how it's playing out, because it's like, I get what's I can understand that they've fallen over or whatever, but I'm not laughing because I can't see it.
Well, also, but if you're blind, you can't see what the reaction is of the person it's happening to, and a lot of the comedy comes from them reacting not like that it's hurting them, but in a sort of overstated or understated way. So it's not just the act. So if you said to someone, to a blind person, Richie is being electrocuted, that sounds horrific. But if you can see it, and you can see the way it's looking, or you can see the reaction to a punch, then
you have to describe it too much.
Expression, their facial expression does a lot, even, and any physical comedy like is going through using the body, any aspect of the body. I mean, we were going to talk about Rowan Atkinson's documentary that we all watched, I think, on YouTube YouTube.
Yeah.
I think it was a 6-part ITV documentary, and I'm gutted. I think there's only really one that's surviving on YouTube. If anyone out there has got the other episodes,
What
of this
they called?
taped. So the one that I watched was just called Visual Comedy.
Yeah.
The
but
whole
Rowan-
series is called...
It's called Laughing Matters.
There
Okay,
we
so
are.
if anyone out there has got the full series of Laughing Matters by Rowan Atkinson, I think it went out in 1993 on ITV or 1992, obviously around the time of Mr. Bean. And he, in the visual comedy one, plays a brilliant role of like a professor kind of going through a lecture about what physical comedy means, and it's fascinating, isn't it, going through all the different stages, obviously how you build up as a comedian, the physical humour, you know, how you use your body to get the laughter and create an attitude that is really, very inherent, which fascinated me, because he mentions that the reason we watch Charlie Chaplin now and we very rarely laugh, even though we recognise that it's comic, is because we can't identify with his attitude. And that really made sense to me. It's like, yeah, that's what it is, because it is funny what Charlie Chaplin's doing, but it's never made me laugh.
I agree with that, because I've watched a fair amount of silent comedy in prep for this, and also for a film I did recently, which was where Charlie Chaplin was sort of referenced in the film. And you find yourself watching it and appreciating it on a technical level, but not laughing at it in a way that you enjoy modern stuff. But also, when you're watching it, when you're seeing one of Laurel and Hardy falling off a roof, or someone on roller skate nearly being hit by a car, it's funny. You can see where the modern versions of that have sort of drawn from, where we've evolved to. So I will watch something happening to Rick or Raid in Bottom and laugh my arse off at it. But if I see a similar thing happening to Harold Lloyd or Charlie Chaplin, it doesn't quite tickle me as much.
Because you're invested in the character.
Yeah.
I think...
apparently the main things in physical and visual comedy and character and attitude is you're either stupid or very dim. I'm sure you can all recognise immediately in a lot of comedy characters, like old and new. Or you're arrogant, or you're aggressive, and that will elicit a laugh. Or you're crude, or you're vulgar. Which, of course, everyone couldn't recognise from Bottom as well. But they're the main three attitudes, apparently, that the comedian will adopt in order to elicit laughter.
Rich and Eddie have all three of those qualities, don't they? But the one that is probably their predominant trait is the crude and perverse, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, they go between them, don't they?
Yeah.
You know, and when you're being arrogant and aggressive, you know, you're usually heading towards a fall, or you will win, or whatever might happen, you know. And a lot of stupidity and dimness. And there was also a big bit in Rowan Atkinson's documentary about being drunk and how that really helps the comedian, of course, just elicit laughter, because the audience is immediately on the
you
joke.
can emphasise with being drunk as well. That's something that...
And you're selling the exaggeration, which is
Yeah.
the other key thing. You're either over-egging the pudding,
Right.
or you're under-egging it, aren't you, for the laugh?
For being drunk, you mean?
Yeah, you know.
But also, that also applies to the reactions to moments of violence. So the thing that is interesting, there's a real psychology to seeing violence on screen, because the violent act in itself is horrible, but it depends entirely on the reaction of the person and the after effect.
Yeah.
So in reality, if someone were to chainsaw off someone's leg, it would be horrific, because there would be blood everywhere, the person would be screaming. But if there's no blood and the person on screen is reacting in a sort of outlandish, gurning way, it becomes funny. And that's what differentiates horror from comedy.
That's the thing. The comedian is indestructible in every single sketch you will ever watch, with the, you know, huge amounts of calamities happening around. The comedian, they will come out unscathed.
Yeah.
And that is why it's in that, you know, we say it all the time, the cartoon element, but that's what sells it to the audience.
The line that stood out for me in that Rowan Atkinson video was when he said, the laws of existence have to be undermined. So, for example, when Richie chops his finger off and then pulls it up and you see blood spurting. Now there is blood, but it's not horrific. It's cartoonish and over the top.
Yeah, it's bordering on realistic, that one, though, isn't it? But I think as well that Eddie doesn't react. That's where a lot of the humour comes from.
Which is where the understatement comes in.
Yeah.
You're right, because Eddie's so blasé about it.
That's a bit of a nasty nick, yeah.
So run me through your mindset then, if you're seeing this as an infant or someone that's not seen comedy before. In real life, man walking down the street slips on a banana skin. Inherently funny for some reason.
Yeah.
What if he doesn't get up?
Right.
Then it's not funny anymore.
Yeah.
If it whoop, bong, it's all in the...
It's in the consequences. So if he falls, bumps himself, but is otherwise okay,
And you
that
see
makes
him
it
going,
funny.
Yeah, that's
although
funny we just didn't move
It
anymore.
is how you sell it, isn't it? Because not to go too dark, but when Tommy Cooper killed over on stage in front of the audience, they thought it was part of the act, didn't
Because
they?
it
And apparently
actually
they
is
were all
funny,
laughing.
though. But
But then, of course, the mood in the room must have turned.
Yeah.
And that would be all gut wrenching because, like you say, like when it's real, like oh no, there's actually something wrong, and that happens quite a lot, doesn't it? And the idea of comedy violence is like obviously that the comedian is going to survive the act, isn't it? You kind of know from the setup that is what you're being drawn into in comedy.
It's the person it's happening to. So there, you gave a great example, Matt. A man walks down a street and he slips. Now, let's look at what the man is wearing. If the man is wearing old clothes and is on a walking stick and he falls over...
You're right, even funnier.
Oh, no, right, it's veering into tragedy.
Suit
but
or
if the
something
man
you
walking
want,
down the street is Jacob Rees-Mogg and he slips on a banana skin and lands face first in some dog shit, then it's hilarious.
That's something that Krusty the Clown was saying or something, I remember, with Sideshow Bob's. So Cecil is playing out. It's like the clown gag, the pie gag only works if the sap's got dignity. Throw it to that one.
Yeah.
It's very, very true. And I was looking into the history of the pie in the face, actually.
Yeah.
And that is absolutely fascinating. Have you guys
got
any idea of where the pie originated from?
Is it from like court jesters or something like that?
Well, apparently the first time it's on film is what I've looked into.
Okay.
I don't know whether it was done on the vaudeville stage or musical, but the first time it was ever... It's disputed. So in 1909 there was a film called Mr. Flip. He apparently gets a pie to the face after having gone round all of the places in town flirting with women or sexually harassing them, apparently.
There's a bit of a difference between...
Well, so this is silent film,
the
just
two
like
different
OE
sources that I'm referencing
called
called it flirting and the other was like, it was pretty much sexual harassment.
Right.
And then he ends up in a restaurant and a waitress puts a pie in his face.
Okay, so it's payback.
So that's the first ever face pie, but it
Yeah.
wasn't thrown. So this is why it's disputed, because I think in 1913 there was a short comedy called A Noise from the Deep, and that starred Fatty Arbuckle and Mabel Normand, which is someone who I hadn't heard of, but apparently she was the female Charlie Chaplin. She starred in 12 films with Chaplin. She was actually a bit of a mentor to Chaplin, all this kind of amazing stuff. But she, apparently during like the rehearsals or whatever, Fatty said to her, throw a pie in my face, that the scene was in. Apparently it's lost to the mists of time, this film, but then I did read another source that it's in the New York Museum somewhere, that it was actually broadcast in 2006. Anyway, I digress. They said in rehearsals there was pastries in the scene on the table, and apparently he said, throw the pie at me during the scene, and they did it, and they surprised the director Max Sennett, who's known as the father of slapstick comedy. Apparently didn't have any idea, but yeah, she threw the pie in the face of Fatty Arbuckle, and it got huge laugh at the time. So that was 1913. And then there was another film of the very same year by the same studios, same director. That was also by Keystone Studios, called The Ragtime Band. And that, again, it's disputed which one came first, I think, but there was another pie thrown in that. And that is apparently where it was born. And it's amazing, the pie in the face gag, like the banana skin slipping, like how that has just entered physical humour, isn't it? Like, chairs being pulled away from people.
I think some of the icons like that, the pie in the face, the banana peel, it just makes me think of the Beano, which is a very physical, like the visual side of it. You've got to draw people in. Hey, look at this cover. There's wacky stuff going on and stuff.
It's interesting that all of this stuff, and it was all mainly early American cinema, is that it's, whether it's pulling a chair away, throwing a pie at someone's face, it's all acts of violence against someone.
But comedy violence.
It predates noise, the talkies and stuff. So like the delivery of lines wasn't possible now. So they could just either put up a joke on the screen or do something funny. So I suppose
that's the point. Yeah. The language of comedy, if it's physical, translates no matter what your language in the world is. You can understand what's going on stage.
You're right.
You don't need language.
You're the first comedy thing to be put on film?
No, go on.
I think he's in that Mr. Bean thing.
Oh, actually, yes.
Yeah.
No, yeah. But the hose pipe.
Oh, yeah. The guy standing on a hose
it's
pipe.
It's done shit. It looks rubbish. The timing's way off. The hose pipe. Yeah, so it's a guy walking.
Is it like a farmer and a farm hand or something?
I think so, yeah.
Then it ends with him hitting the kid, and that's the punchline.
So to extrapolate from what you said there, because I think you've made a very good point there, Matt, because when the medium of movies first came out, they didn't have sound with them. Physical gags and physical comedy was a natural evolution to put on screen because you couldn't rely on a witty gag, because in order to show the witty gag you had to have them say it silently while the honky-tonk piano played, and then have the text flash up on the screen.
Yeah. I guess the piano boom boom can emphasize a thing happening but can't emphasize a line being said, as at least not in the same way.
Yeah. I mean, silent movies, the idea of watching moving film alone was apparently, it was like us going to watch any kind of blockbuster now with all the excitement that would do to your senses. Like,
the story of the Looney Brothers film with the train arriving in the platforms, the first thing, and apparently people ran away. So first of all, the angle's not heading towards you fucking fool.
But imagine having
you idiot.
never seen something moving quickly on screen in front of you.
But it's still, I doubt it actually happened that way. I think it's probably exaggerated for the
it's like
story.
I suppose it's like when you go and watch a 3D film,
never ran out the audience, never
run out. No, but occasionally you might flinch or something because your brain sees what it's seeing and it thinks it's actually happening. But I've heard that about your brain, isn't it? Like no matter if you're watching something, your brain thinks it's real.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you can't really fool your brain. That's why horrors are scary, and that's why we have those innate reactions to things, because our brain is absorbing
getting
it
the senses
real.
Being stimulated.
Yeah,
I see.
Like you're watching the telly, but you still get scared, and it's really interesting that comedy and horror obviously have the same elements of surprise and the unexpected. We have the same reactions to fear that we do to what makes us laugh, but the way in which they're sold is obviously why we react differently.
Timing and reactions are really key to both of those genres, aren't they? To comedy and to horror.
And that's the thing with Mr. Bean or any of the kind of physical, that's gone, worldwide? Like literally every country has watched Mr. Bean and loves it because you don't need that language to understand it.
So clever that you did that, isn't it?
You mentioned commedia dell'arte, which sounds amazing. Italian comedy is obviously what we coined it because it's hard to pronounce. But did you know about the different characters and everything that you get in commedia dell'arte, or the different physical shapes they take?
Yeah, so it's
I do not know.
So it's a bunch of archetypes. I studied this very briefly, like
what
maybe
kind?
a week. Like you'll have things like the Fall is one of the things. The Doctor.
Yeah, you've got
big nose
masters
one.
And servants. You've got the Doctor. You've essentially got, the lovers. You've got military officers who are full of bravado. And Puccinella, I think, is the original Punch. That's the inspiration for Punch and Judy.
So
go
Punch,
into it, but he's got a hooked nose mask. So they're masked characters.
So lots of different performers will be able to play them. And so, for example, stick out their belly and swagger their head as they move.
That's right.
Are these...
The one that fascinated me particularly was Pantolon, who is a greedy old man generally. He represents money, and he's got a hunched back.
Sorry.
No, but the idea... and when
like Fagin.
I'm just seeing the Fagin character.
Steptoe, Albert Steptoe, that kind of hunched back and that idea that just from looking at that, you're getting the stereotype of what that character is
stereotype is so important in comedy because it's a time saver, isn't it? And unfortunately, that is kind of hand in hand with racism. A lot of the stereotype of show that they're a fool.
This is the thing, because obviously, I think just to touch upon it, Papa Lazarou in The League of Gentlemen is clearly inspired by commedia dell'arte. I've heard recent Steve talking about commedia dell'arte. They obviously study drama. They will know exactly what they're trying to achieve with that. And I think Papa Lazarou, just the way he moves, everything that Reese does with him, it's clearly influenced by it. And it's difficult, isn't it? Because the masked idea of performers and all of that is probably why they decided to do blackface with Papa Lazarou. And now I can understand why someone who doesn't have any idea of what the comedy is, if you looked at it, you'd be like, well, that's not okay.
Yeah.
And the same kind of gets said about various comedies that have gone through the mist of time that we don't have to touch upon all of them. I never watched Papa Laz and thought that's a racist thing, but I could understand why people would watch it and think, yeah, it is. But it's the circus performer thing, isn't it? It's the clown.
It was... Papa Lazarou always seemed too grotesque to be a deliberate racist trope or anything like that. He was just an odd monster.
Otherworldly.
I thought he was just wearing makeup. The character was wearing something, but I don't think that's true because I think he wipes off flesh colour makeup to have that underneath.
A bit like the Joker.
They make it that way, don't they? But I think he's a terrifying clown. Is the idea? He's the ringmaster, isn't he? In the circus, Papa Lazarus circus. I won't do the voice, but it upsets me that people think that it's racist because I know that obviously they are doing the whole running away with your wife. And that is a stereotype of gypsy traveller types in the circus, isn't it? Ran away with the circus. Yeah. That is a stereotype. People might disagree, agree with me, but I don't think that they were going into that trying to in any way be racist.
No.
Welcome to Talking League of Gentlemen. Richie and Eddie, do they fit any archetypes? I mean, you've kind of got master-servant stuff going on. You've got the fool.
Absolutely. Yeah, they flip between the fool, the drunkard, the money
The
pinching.
miser, yeah.
And you just kind of, there's some facial expressions and stuff.
Pomposity.
And I think a lot of that's
brought down.
sold in the suits and the tie and the thing, which we'll go into in another episode. But other things like, the physical mannerisms of Dave Hedgehog and Spudgun, as soon as they turn up, you know everything you need to about them, don't you?
Yeah.
You can see their body language. Yeah, so body language is a huge part of physical comedy,
Yeah,
isn't
well,
it?
Richie himself, to talk about just slightly for the commedia dell'arte, the Harlequin character, I read a couple of things that apparently sum that character up, and he's a dimwit, he's faithful, and he's got boundless energy. And that to me just kind of did sum up a little bit of Rick's performance in Richie, isn't there? Obviously there's lots of other complex character traits going on in Richie, but that idea that, you've got the fool that can be just constantly running around the stage and getting laughter, like that's Rick all over, isn't it?
Yeah, very much so. Like, there's a lot in their mannerisms and body language. In certain episodes, you see it. Rick's very good with his face. He has got a similar thing that Rowan Atkinson has that Rick doesn't really utilise as much as Rowan Atkinson does, which he's got that very expressive rubber face where he can pull lots of different expressions. His go-to one as Richie is often perversion. It's the flaring of the nostrils.
Nostrils makes me think of Arnold Rimmer. I'd say it's eyebrows for Rick Mel. Like you can raise up either one, left, right,
Such
left,
an
right, left, right.
expressive face. I mean, he could go through embarrassment, he could go through nervousness, he could go through perversion, he could go through being, the bravado or whatever, and then being brought down a peg or two. And Rick was incredible at being able to. But he said he liked playing people who were slightly crap, didn't he?
Yeah.
Which I've always admired how he can do the nervousness of Richie, and then just turn it on its head. But Rowan Atkinson.
His face was what got him into comedy, wasn't it? Through his Footlights audition.
Okay.
Did you know that?
Do you remind us of which skit?
So when he was at Cambridge University, he wanted to get into Footlights, and he was preparing something for an audition. And he tells this story that he was just looking in his bathroom mirror, and he just started doing things with his face. He's got that sort of rubber face. And I believe he got his electric shaver and started doing this thing that he's since done, I think, in Mr. Bean and a few online skits. And we see in the video of the physical comedy thing that's on YouTube. And that was basically his audition piece for Footlights.
Okay,
Just
so
clowning
that
of
just
such,
shows
isn't
that
it?
if anyone hasn't seen it, is that where he's kind of shaving his eyebrows and his tongue?
His tongue, yeah.
And that's a bit like Eddie, isn't it, in the mirror?
Very much.
When they're getting ready to go out in smells, aren't they? Because it is funny, isn't it, the shaving of the tongue? Like, just the idea of it is like inherently kind of like gross.
Before that, everything is on the face, so that you would expect kind of, but it's done in a slightly odd way. And then it goes into an area that, you wouldn't normally shave a tongue, therefore it's unexpected.
Well, that's the point. It's unexpected, and it's also not conforming to social expectations, isn't it? That's another key thing of the not only physical humour, but humour in general, isn't it? It's like, having little regard for what should be happening in the scene, and that's what gives you the surprise, and that's what makes you laugh.
It's putting an object in a place that it should never normally be. I've noticed in that Rowan Atkinson video, he had 3 rules for objects. An object is funny by behaving in an unexpected way. And the thing that came to mind there for bottom would be, normally you don't hit a TV and it then explodes. So that's a funny thing that happens that would not normally happen. A piano falling through a ceiling, they don't normally do that. That's unexpected.
Even the clock going off. Oh, ready, don't.
Yeah. The second rule is an object is funny by being in an unexpected place. So, for example, Eddie pulling his coat open and pulling a beer out of it. And this is another drinks one, pulling open the light fitting and taking 2 drinks out from there.
That's in on the live ones, isn't it?
That is, yeah.
And like in the young ones, when they're playing hide and seek, and Neil opens the cupboard, and was it Rick opens the cupboard and immediately finds Mike in there?
That's right, yeah.
And the audience, you're just not expecting him.
Yeah.
You are expecting it because you know it's going to happen, but it's funny to see him in there.
And then also with the young ones, that leads on to the final example, which is an object is funny if it's the wrong size. So in the young ones, an enormous sandwich falling down onto the stage, or in bottom, Richie's thong being so tiny that it's only the size of an elastic band.
Or Richie's penis.
Yeah.
Although you never get to see that, sadly.
Yeah.
It's other things like, it's the big pants. Funnier. Just seeing someone in their pants. Oh, okay, but pair of big pants.
Oh, yeah, and I was going to mention the custody pants tournament, of course, when Rick first comes in, struggling with the huge pants. Like, that is such a great visual gag, isn't
Yeah.
it?
You just read that on the page, just like, oh, okay. You're like, no, we're doing this. Wait and see. The confidence they have to be able to pull that sort of stuff off.
I mean, it's interesting that when people talk about Bottom and they talk about the physical comedy of it and the cartoon aspect, usually their first thought is the violent stuff, but there's actually a lot of non-violent physical humour in Bottom. So they have very clownish performances and mannerisms, whether it's Rick miming Rubber Johnnies in the pub, and Rick also uses these skills when he's Flashheart and Drop Dead Fred, but they don't always do violent stuff. And this happened in the Young Ones and Dangerous Brothers as well. There would be breaking things, but it wouldn't necessarily be them being violent. But in Bottom, you can think of other things such as them farting flames, visual gag, not violent, running through walls. I guess running through walls is kind of violent to the wolf. But Rick, when they're playing chess and he gets up and is sort of playing golf to himself, that's a very
wavy finger thing he does, which
Yeah.
you can't really demonstrate on the podcast, but you all know what I'm talking
Everyone
about.
who's listening will know about that.
But him running across the drain pipe, even that's funny. Like,
There's a lot in the Rottweiler episode, them when they're in the different locations, them doing their own bits, Eddie knocking stuff over, very much being a clown there, like destroying Rottweiler's kitchen, Richie getting into bed with Rottweiler and his missus. And something that almost just goes back to basic sort of almost mime is when Richie is with Lady Natasha and he's behind her and trying to undo her bra and his hands don't work, and he sort of reveals himself from behind her with these floppy hands. With Bottom being Bottom, when it is violent, it's very violent indeed.
Yeah, we can't just go on all the other sides of physical comedy. I think people are tuning into this episode. Physical comedy, yeah, he smashes him with a fucking frying pan.
Probably
Brilliant.
waiting for us to discuss a few fight scenes and a few falls. And
A lot of the comedy comes from over-the-top savagery of Rick and Aid attacking each other with weapons, punching each other, and they take violence that you'd normally only see in cartoons, where consequences are short-lived as everything gets reset, and they apply it to live action. They sort of set new boundaries and standards for physical comedy, especially as it's studio-based as well. It's all there in front of a live audience, being done generally live. I know sometimes they have pre-records like the bathroom fight, but there's so many fires, explosions and props that are integral to it. It's amazing how good it is, but how varied it is considering it's done in a sitcom set.
Yeah, it's almost like how can you do the same thing over and over again, but they find different ways of hitting each other with objects, and it's always different and always funny. Every episode there's something funny.
But apparently that's one of the reasons why the BBC was such a popular place to have your programmes on, of course, because they've got the sound effects, they've got the props department, they've got it all there ready for you, so you can be creative. You can actually think about what you can achieve with the visual gags beyond just what they can do together on stage. I mean, they were really, really creative even when they were at the Comedy Store and Saturday Live and all of those, Dangerous Brothers skits. Like, they're really quite bold. I don't know if you've watched like the Kinky Sex one, which I found on, I don't know if anyone's got it, the DVD of the Dangerous Brothers, Danger Vision, I think it is.
Yeah.
And that was the only one that wasn't saved from live on TV. Apparently it's from a personal video recording from someone. So well done whoever it was who recorded that. But yeah, like Rick's like strapped up in a PVC nursing uniform, to the ceiling, and it's the gag that, Aid gets home and it's like, how's he going to get this prostitute out? Get him in the cupboard. And yeah, I really recommend watching all of the Dangerous Brothers things, because I hadn't watched them as much. Obviously, Bottom and the Young Ones is more what I had watched growing up. And they're just really, really, really bold in what they're trying to achieve. I mean, obviously having prostitutes in bedrooms and all that kind of thing is inherently outrageous and crude and vulgar. And, you're just hitting all of those visual gags as well as the script and that comedy of embarrassment, because of course you've got a prostitute in your bedroom when you get home. That's pretty embarrassing if your flatmate walks in and finds you doing that, isn't it? So again, like, I know people talk about cringe comedy that's come in obviously since The Office and Partridge and all that, but I do actually think there's elements of it all the way through Rick and Aid's work as well.
The classic sitcom convention, isn't it, being embarrassed at all, or having an authority figure come over, the vicar
which
over.
is actually a staple of Keeping Up Appearances.
Yeah, absolutely. The British humour particularly, we're all painfully embarrassed by things that I think it isn't quite the same in American sitcom, is it? Because they're not really as embarrassed as we are about things. We're painfully embarrassed about the most mundane things, like not having sugar in for the vicar when he pops around.
I think it was lampooned really well. I can't remember which episode of The Young Ones it was, but they're watching a shit British sitcom called something like,
crikey.
oh crikey.
Yeah.
And it's a classic, whoops, there go my trousers thing of...
Literally,
oh,
that happens.
My
yeah.
trousers have fallen down, and now it looks like I'm fucking the cat, and now the vicar's walked in. Oh, isn't this embarrassing?
I can explain. Oh, crikey.
I mean, clearly there was quite a few at the time, sitcoms like that they were absolutely mercilessly taking the piss out of. But there is a lot of comedy and embarrassment, you're right.
But how much... That's more the class side of things. How many other sitcoms have violence in them as a staple?
Not many, is there?
No.
I can't
Not every single episode in the way that Bottom and the
Yeah.
Young Ones crashed onto the TV
Yeah.
with their incredible setups and fights, and Richie beating Eddie with a frying pan,
There's
but
no-
Eddie always wins the fight, you know, all that. You don't have that in any other sitcom. But then there is still physical violence in modern day sitcom. Been watching American example, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, and I've just been watching all of that through lockdown. And there are great moments where Dennis gets kicked in the crotch by Charlie, and Dee falls out of, she's stealing shoes and she falls out of the store and
Hits her head
really
on the...
bashes her head into a car.
As someone who's not seen many of... I've seen a couple of this show, and I need to watch more of it because I like
You
what
do,
I saw.
it's great.
Can I ask, in these instances, when these things happen, does it happen once and then that's it?
So that's
Pretty-
that would be the key difference. They
Right.
haven't got big setup comedy
Yeah,
violence in the
yeah.
way that Rick and Aid did it. No.
Because I can't think of another show. I know there are the ones where we reference where there is physical comedy in them. Mr. Bean, very physical. Some others do have a lot of physicality, but there's nothing beyond a few Reeves and Mortimer sketches where you see people getting twatted with frying pans or carefully choreographed fights that are done for comedy, apart from if it's in a cartoon, if it's a Tom and Jerry or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, they don't... Vic and Bob are always referenced that, always a bit, a little bit like Bottom stuff, but yes, just from sketches.
Yeah.
Sometimes they'll be doing a little bit of their fake panel show thing and then hit each other.
That's
not
it,
the same
end
thing.
of a sketch, isn't
Yeah.
it? You're the pie in the face. It's the way
Yeah.
to round off a sketch, but it's not throughout an entire half-hour run of sitcom or even a film. When you look at Guest House Paradiso, you know the amount of violence that they fit into that.
So the fact that Rick and Aid really are the only people who do this continually in sitcom brings me to a topic I want to ask you guys about and get your opinions on. And it's quite apt that they were called the Dangerous Brothers, because it's talking about the lack of modern physical comedy and the perceived need for danger in it. My reading up on it goes like this. The modern trend for comedy is largely verbal, stand-up comedy, sketch comedy, but you do see physical comedy in films and on adverts. But generally comedy is people going up to a microphone and talking into it. Sitcoms have lots of gags and it's all based in character. But there's not really, as we've just discussed, anything where you have that much physical comedy on screen.
You have act out, don't you? You have act out gags, but the idea of violent humour isn't necessarily the trend that's happening, I'd say, for the last 10, 15 years since.
Exactly. I was reading an article recently on the New Yorker website where someone argued that physical comedy had been, in quote marks, moralised out of existence. And the argument goes along these lines. Physical comedy depends on danger and the possibility of death, or the inference of the possibility of death, or at least injury. And therefore, because too often these days the phrase "you couldn't do that these days" is used by people, usually harking back to when you could be openly racist or offensive about things. But you can actually use this phrase about much of physical comedy that we see now in Bottom and through Rick and Aid's work. You see things like the Towering Inferno act they did, where one of them sets the other one on fire on stage. That's something that you wouldn't see now. And I don't want to always blame health and safety legislation or that kind of thing, but you wouldn't now be able to set someone on fire live on television. But also, you wouldn't get now in a sitcom, you wouldn't have a piano crashing down through onto the stage with the actor on it, or a bed doing it, the young ones with the two actors on it, because it would be done with CG and stuntmen and all these kind of safety things. So as nowadays, when you get these kind of physical comedy bits, which you'll see in a film with like Melissa McCarthy or something like that, there'll be her flying around in the Ghostbusters remake because she can't control the proton stream. When we're watching that, we know it's CG or a stunt double. So does the lack of perceived danger reduce the comedy? Do you see my point?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, your skirts rocked up a bit, but
Yeah.
I do see that argument. The idea that it's no longer real. You mean
Yeah.
that CGI
Well,
takes away some of the shine?
Yeah, because when we see Buster Keaton or Charlie Chaplin or Harold Lloyd doing it, that's not a stunt double and it's not CG. We know that actually when that car crosses in front of the train and narrowly misses it, we know that happened in real life.
So yeah, I don't think the same thing we say same thing Rowan Atkinson was saying that Charlie Chaplin, we don't really find him funny anymore. Those stuff with Buster Keaton, don't think that's funny either. I just think that's impressive more. That's just
Okay.
like, fucking hell, wow.
Yeah, I watched Charlie Chaplin, and I'm really, really, really in awe of
Yeah.
what they're being, that what's being achieved on screen. But you don't necessarily laugh anymore. Do you think societal attitudes have changed towards physical comedy then? Do you think this, when we do mention Bottom and people say, oh, it's only slapstick, and you want to twat them with a kidney dish, like, the idea behind that is that, clowning and tomfoolery and all of the things that make up slapstick or comedy violence, that's looked down upon.
People do look down on clowning. The word clown means negative now, that guy's a clown. You mean, oh, thank you very much.
Is that inherently because we think wordy comedy is much more made for the people who are clever?
Yeah.
And things have moved forward in that way rather than... But then inherently we will still laugh at someone who suffers a calamity and that they're okay at the end, that they've not...
But is there a slight snobbery now not towards someone who takes a tumble once, that's funny, but towards someone who takes a tumble every day? Does that then get people looking down their nose going, that's a bit tragic? So back in the day of Charlie Chaplin and Harold Lloyd, the audience loved that they were throwing themselves downstairs and falling out of windows and that kind of thing. Now, if we see someone doing that all the time and destroying their body, do we feel a bit sorry for them?
How do you explain things like Jackass and the amount of videos that go around online with people injuring themselves in various different hideous ways? Do you think we've actually got too much of that for free on YouTube now, that in comedy it's almost you can't really write that into a sitcom because now people are addicted to it being really real?
Maybe. I think
it's only a theory. I'm not saying that is definitely it. I'm just like, that is interesting because these videos are really popular. It's like You've Been Framed on Acid, isn't it? Most of it now that goes.
I think maybe the popularity of shows like You've Been Framed and Candid Camera, where due to the mass availability of camcorders and now phones, seeing these things is commonplace. So shows like You've Been Framed were really popular when they first came out because it was rare to see people falling over at a wedding. It was funny.
Absolutely.
But now it's become commonplace.
Well, Noel's Christmas video, Family Accidents, is that you can look them up all day long.
But I'm really glad you mentioned Jackass because I have a point to make about that. And Jackass is probably the only thing I can think of where you see actual dangerous stunts that are akin to the kind of things that Rick and Aid do in a studio. But on Jackass, the stunt is the joke. In Bottom and Young Ones, it's not the stunt that's the joke. That's them doing something incidental as part of a story and in character. On Jackass, it's them saying, look at us doing a dangerous thing, isn't it funny? That's
exactly what I would say. Is that's what annoys me when people say it is just slapstick, because it's being woven into the narrative in Bottom, and that's what makes it so much, it elevates it. It's so much more intelligent and clever.
Like, Johnny Knoxville, well done. You did a very dangerous thing, getting fired out of a cannon or being on a ladder that a car drove through the bottom of it. But Rick and Aid do something like that whilst also doing lines, being in character, hitting their marks and performing something in a studio.
I mean, we haven't mentioned it yet either, but obviously Sacha Baron Cohen with Borat, and every time he surprises real people in the public, there brings an extra element to it, doesn't it? Because he's being a fool in front of them, and he's often like either setting himself or them up, isn't he? And that's very physical as well. It's
very physical, but also there's another different kind of sense of danger there. That if you take Borat, there's a great physical comedy scene where him and his manager run through a hotel naked and wrestle.
So there's the gross element.
There's partly the gross element, but it's not funny in itself because it's naked men wrestling, but it's because they're surrounded by people who think it's real, who aren't in on the joke.
Which is a thing being somewhere that it's not meant to be.
Yeah, it gives an element of danger and also makes it slightly uncomfortable.
It's interesting that that's where it's developed to, isn't it? And I do wonder what is next in sitcom, and because things come round often in a cycle, but it feels like slapstick is now something that has been not consigned to the history books, but it feels like a lot of people aren't necessarily setting out to write a new sitcom that's going to rival Bottom. And maybe there are people out there writing that, but you'd have to be really, really good at your craft. And I don't know whether you've got, like you were saying, there's not as much of it, so there's not as many opportunities to practice it in the way that Rick and Aid did. They had years and years of practicing these characters and doing these stunts.
Did you see, just talking about Sacha Baron Cohen, he did, and also Charlie Chaplin, when he accepted an award at the Britannia Awards in the US.
Phenomenal.
He did a great thing. And again, this involves people not being in on the joke. So he was there to accept some award. I don't know whether it was a Lifetime Achievement Award or this year's Favourite Person Award. Salma Hayek was there to present the award. And she had on stage next to her this little old lady in a wheelchair. And she presented her as this lady. At the age of 5, she starred in City Lights with Charlie Chaplin. She's the only surviving actor to have worked with him. And she had Charlie Chaplin's cane. And Sacha Baron Cohen came on stage and accepted the award, and she handed him the cane and said, "This was Charlie's cane."
Presenting it as if that's part of the reward.
Yeah,
and stuff.
I would like you to have it. And he took it, and he's very gracious. And he started sort of clowning around on stage doing a Chaplin, and then he slips and falls forward and pushes her in her wheelchair off the stage onto the floor in front of Julia Roberts, George Clooney, Ben Kingsley, a load of other actors. You hear this for a moment, and then Sacha Baron Cohen jumps down and starts doing CPR on her, and then you get this sort of relieved, oh, it's all a big joke. When you look at it again, you realise, oh, it's a stunt woman with old makeup on. But it's a really great gag. No one sees it coming. He does a load of CPR, then someone comes and picks her up and starts taking her off as he gets back on stage and saying, "Thank you for this award." Yeah, he's doing his speech and then stops and goes, "Can you get her out of here? She's kind of upstaging me, man, okay?"
My favourite little moment in that is that, was
Grace Cunningham was the last. No, it was a great bit of physical comedy. He did a great Chaplin walk, but also it was unexpected. The audience was surprised, not in on the joke, and it felt dangerous.
I think that's the difference, isn't it, now, that it's just having people who are bold enough to do it, and you have to have planned it out, and it's a hell of a lot of hard work, I imagine, setting up that kind of a gag and making sure it's going to pay off because you've got one chance to do it. Because, again, going back to the pie in the face, there was a real trepidation around, if we don't get this one shot, we get that pie exactly where it's meant to go, then you've got to go back into makeup, you've got to change, you've got to go back and reshoot it all. Of course you would, because you'd have to clean it all off, and so there was a real, it's one shot or nothing. That it's not danger necessarily, but it adds tension, doesn't it?
Do you remember, I can't remember the exact details of who the performers were, it was like Strictly Come Dancing or something, it was this sad old bloke dancing in a Sugar Plum Fairy type thing, and it was all taken ultra seriously, but it's the humour of, it's this aging old stupid man doing it, and then it ends with a weight being dropped on him.
I don't remember this at all.
And it pans up and you see this other ugly, weird, sad old git laughing like ha 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 ha.
Right. Are you talking about Let's Dance for Comic Relief?
Yeah.
Rick and Aid? Yeah. I thought you were talking around it. I was like, so that was the, when Aid did the Dying Swan routine, and Rick obviously ends up dropping the 10-ton weight on him,
which is has your mind of it from the Chaplin thing he was asking.
As you were describing it, the thing that came to mind was I was visualising it as a Terry Gilliam Monty Python cartoon for some reason.
All right,
it really does play out like a cartoon. Because I think in the semi-final, didn't he come on with the frying pan, Rick?
I think so.
And really, he was like, just die and beat.
It was like his last ever appearance on the BBC, Rick.
With AIDS, that was 2011. But that was the last time. Obviously, they didn't know it, but that was the last time they were going to be on stage. It's great, that clip. It feels really old school, doesn't it, when you watch it?
And it's because you don't know it's coming as well, and it's to an audience. A lot of young people. Who's that weird man that came on and attacked Mr. Edmondson?
Well, because Aid sells it in the second one really well, because he's doing the dying routine, and he's kind of looking behind him, isn't he? Where is he? Is he going to come on? And then it's like celebration, and then the ton weight drops on him. And it reminded me of the Dangerous Brothers sketch where the 2 pianos get dropped on them. Right. Remember that one? So. And there's a really great misdirection in that gag where they're just like, we're going to have to drop. We're going to have to drop the piano gag. And then they drop. Brilliant play on words and physical, it's all of the hits are being there. It's not just... I hate saying just, because slapstick is amazing. I really admire... the more that I look into it, the more I admire it as an art form.
Have you ever had a milkshake? Oh, it's just ice cream and milk.
Well, this is it. The fact that it does speak to us all inherently, and you don't need language in order to translate it. That should be something that is really... I think celebrated, the fact that Mr. Bean's gone all around the world, and he's literally the most recognisable face in British comedy, isn't he? Rowan Atkinson, as a result of Mr. Bean, not Blackadder. Yeah. Even though I would say I'd much rather watch Blackadder day in day out than I would rewatch Mr. Bean. It's perfect clowning, isn't it, as Mr. Bean? I mean, have you got a favourite episode of
Mr. Bean? Yeah. I remember really enjoying it as a younger person. I can't remember how old I was. It was to do with props, but also the way he used them. Very simple. He's at a park bench. I think it's with Angus Deaton. It could be Richard Driscoll. I think it's Angus Deaton. And Angus Deaton is eating a sandwich. And Mr. Bean wants a sandwich. He's jealous. Fortunately, he's got all the constituent components on him, but he has to prepare them. And so in order to do that, he does things like... I can't remember how he washes his lettuce, but he puts it in a sock and spins it above his head to dry it. In order to butter the bread, he gets out a credit card and butters it, and then does one of these few lines in that episode in his funny voice, "My flexible friend," which in his voice is a very funny thing. That was probably one of my favourite ones, and it was so simple, and it's just two people in a studio sat next to each other.
And was that predating Rowan doing the Barclays ad? Didn't he do Barclay card?
Or maybe you got it from that.
I'm not sure. Maybe
he does actually, doesn't it? I remember him on the Barclay card. Anyway, I digress. But yeah, my favourite would probably be the dentist episode. If you remember, that one is brilliant because in the first half it's him realising he's late. He gets up late and it's rushing to get ready, and he's in the car, getting dressed. He's brushing his teeth with the windscreen wash or whatever. And he's like trying to eat his bowl of cereal, all that kind of thing. And then it's Victor Meldrew, Richard Wilson, as the dentist in the second half of that half hour, and obviously it all just like goes through, like, Mr. Bean ends up like giving him like the drugs, doesn't he, and he's like knocked out, and then Bean does his own filling. I think he just does it.
He does the wrong tooth. He does every single tooth. Yeah, it's horrific. Imagine like how much pain that doing it yourself. My favourite one, I would say, is the exam, where
I really love that one as
well. I used to do it in school all the time, where he slides across without moving. It's just the physical, what you're actually doing. It's very easy to do, actually, but it just looks so impressive. And the fact that what the character's doing doesn't make any sense at all. It's like, well, I still notice you moving just because your body's not. It's so fun. And the payoff of he had the wrong exam, he did the wrong one.
But it's brilliant, isn't it? Because it is inherently, everyone knows you shouldn't be cheating, but you're kind of willing him to succeed in it, aren't you? Even though obviously it's breaking the social convention, as all comedians should be doing. And the fact that he obviously gets his comeuppance and all of that. And so well done.
And now it's time for a word from our sponsors.
Buy the Talking Bottom book. It's available on unbound.com. If it's available on unbound.com, does that mean there's a chance it's not going to come out? No, because it got funded in one fucking week, because it's that good. Get in on the action. The Talking Bottom book on unbound.com. Search for bottom.
So I was researching physical comedy for the Talking Bottom book, and it brought me to a quote from Mel Brooks, which is this: "Tragedy is when I cut my finger. Comedy is when you fall into an open sewer and die." And it put me in mind of a scene in A Fish Called Wanda that I'd heard a story about, which is in that film, Michael Palin is trying to kill a little old lady, and he keeps on accidentally, systematically killing her dogs.
Yeah.
And apparently in the test screening for that film, when he killed one of the dogs, when it was squashed, when the thing was pulled back, I think it was I can't remember if it was a piano.
It's either piano or like a skip.
Apparently, in the original version of the film, when the object was pulled back, there was a sort of disgusting, flattened dog that looked quite realistic. And obviously, test audiences did not laugh at this. So what they did was they reshot it, and then they had the comedy pancake flattened dog. So my question is, why do moments that would otherwise be tragic amuse us? Is it because we go into it expecting comedy? Why are we laughing at these scenes? Is it because of the unrealism of the result?
Absolutely, I think that is a key part of it. But I also think the reason you're laughing at that is also because he's been trying to kill her, and then there's the obviously it's an innocent. He ends up getting the dog, so he hasn't even achieved what he wanted to. So he's a dimwit, he's the fool.
I think as well is the fact that it's not like, oh, it's just a fucking dog. He loves animals, so he
so attitude comes into it.
So some of the comedy comes from the fact that he sees what he's done and feels guilty and is crying. If it was Kevin Kline's character doing it and didn't give a shit,
it would not be as funny.
Have you seen the Inside Number 9 with the dog getting thrown at the window?
Yes.
A Quiet Night In is the episode. I don't know if you've seen it, Matt.
I've seen all of them.
The burglars, and it's all completely silent.
Yeah.
So brilliant example of physical comedy, because the whole thing, apart from the odd line here and there, is mine. To anyone who hasn't watched it, he ends up killing a dog, doesn't he? Like throws it to get it out of the house and throws it at the window. Why is that funny? Because it is quite, it's not really sold as he feels guilty about it, because then they put it in the plant pot, don't they? And then like bash it down and everything. I think it's because because it's so horrible that you have to laugh because it's so unbelievably not okay.
Yeah,
maybe.
Release of pressure, I suppose.
Again, I think they're burglars, aren't they? Their attitude is that they're criminals, you know. So you're letting them do these horrible things because they're getting away with quite literally murder later on, is it? So it's that it leads you up to setting the scene of what their attitude is, and if they don't mind killing a dog, they're going to kill anyone.
A lot of physical gags are about what leads up to it, the setup that actually then puts the cherry on top of the physical thing that we're seeing. The thing that comes to mind here is Del Boy falling through a bar. In itself, a man falling over, mildly funny. But if you add to the fact that before that, him and Trigger are trying to impress some women in the bar. They're trying to be all smooth. They think that, they're going to pull them.
He's got a bit of dignity when he's dressed up nicely.
His ego is being bruised and his air of cool is being deflated.
Oh, and he's trying to show off to Trigger. Play it nice and cool, son. Play it nice and cool. Isn't it? Like, he's trying to be the one who's better than Trigger, and then he ends up being the fool. So he's knocked down.
The fall itself, the fall, F-A-L-L, is completely like rigid and flat. The way he falls, that in itself is funny.
Oh god, yeah, the way David Jason sells that is amazing. I can't watch that scene anymore though, thanks to Stuart Lee.
Yeah.
You're aware of what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
The big wicker man.
Yeah.
That is amazing because obviously it always tops all the kind of greatest comedy moments, doesn't it? And it is brilliant. There's no taking that away from David Jason's performance in that.
And also, I know it's been said when people have talked about the scene before, but it's added to by Trigger's reaction as well, looking around as though Del has suddenly disappeared. Right, so I thought what we might do is have a little run through the episodes of Bottom and talk about some of the elements of physical humour in them, starting at the beginning.
Isn't that what we did in series 1, 2 and 3 of our podcast?
Yes, but we didn't focus specifically on physical comedy.
Okay. Yeah, we're going to fly through this one.
So, starting at the beginning, smells. What comes to mind immediately there is what I would always choose as actually one of my favourite scenes of the entire show is the bathroom fight.
Mm-hmm. It's one of the only times they use any kind of, not camera trickery, but the fight is shot in a dynamic way. They do a little bit in future episode, which I'll bring up when we get to that one. Can you bear the suspense for which episode we're going to be? It's the chest fight scenes, what I'm talking about. Absolutely, because that's like one gag after another. It's not just punch, 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 is it? It's the starting off the nostrils and the smack. It's the beginning of it. It's not a fight; it's a misunderstanding, and it's
using a variety of props as well, which obviously props can be inherent to the physical or visual comedy. Objects acting in ways that you're not expecting them to, and obviously the pliers look quite convincingly real, don't they? But you don't often see someone's nose getting ragged around a bathroom with a pair of pliers at the nose. It's inherently funny.
Those pliers are one of my favourite props in Bottom. They look so real. The way they just connect.
A thing of you can imagine what that feels like, right? It's something that's just accessible enough, I think, and it's an everyday object used in a different way.
But something else that comes to mind in that episode when it comes to physical comedy is not violence. It's Rick behind the lesbians in the pub, miming Johnny's and also trying to sort of waft the love potion over them.
Yeah, that my favourite thing with the wafting is the spraying concentrated into his armpit and then puts it over. That's really subtle the way he does it. It's not over the top, but like the action itself is over the top. The wafting,
it's definitely exaggerated movements, isn't it?
Also, we got vomit right at the top of the episode,
and then of course the freeze frame at the end of Smells is when Eddie's obviously trying to have it off with Richie, isn't he? And he's going for the chair first. He's going for Richie, and then the punch. So it does end on.
So in Gas, the one that comes to mind really is them beating the absolute shit out of the Gas Man. It's such a great extended sequence. Ed By talked about it, the way Rick was trying to sort of have a competition with the sound guy, the fact that you've got Richie and Eddie alternating with each other, and the reactions from the Gas Man as well. But also in that episode, once they go over to Rottweiler's place, individually they have a lot of moments themselves, don't they? Physical comedy.
I mean, on the bed, Richie when the bed collapses, of course, and all that, and Richie's amongst them. Aid just getting all that food out of the fridge, and like the breaking of the china and putting one little cup back. No one would ever know.
And that's through Undersold as well, isn't it? There's a comedy thing, a very cartoony, very, very Tom and Jerry, opening up a fridge full of stuff. There's something kind of, it's almost not funny, but it's, I don't know, there's something there, isn't there?
I mean, it's the greed, isn't it, aspect of it. Right, and that's what does hark back to probably ancient Greece, that people would be lampooned for various different traits that are actually, not to be desired. And social convention wouldn't be that you'd go into anyone's house and rob their entire food supply and their gas. It's criminal
covering
behaviour.
up a theft. They go and steal more. Yeah.
And in the Rowan Atkinson documentary, again, he's, it was like inherently in the comedian, they've got no regard for legality or morality was one of the things, and that is Richie and Eddie all over.
The final thing I would mention in that is just the shot where Richie is running towards the kitchen and a gas explosion happens in the same shot. He jumps back from.
Amazing. And Rottweiler at the end.
That's what I would say, the Kool-Aid moment.
It's Kool-Aid,
But it's, he is playing that. You wouldn't play that any differently if you were doing a slasher film and Brian Glover was the serial killer or the monster, whatever. He performed exactly the same way, but just because we know it's a comedy, that gets a laugh, it doesn't get a gasp.
So next one, Contest. This one was the pilot, so they weren't playing the characters slightly the same as they did for the rest of the series. So there's not as many bits of what one would call physical humour in here.
I know what I would say.
Richie,
the kettle
the
boy.
Kettle, the kettle's still hot and then falling out of the window and the calamity of him coming back up and, the amount of pain I'm in would suggest.
I totally agree, but they're all in about the last 3 minutes, aren't
That's true. There's a lot of wordy build-up. But, Richie dropping his trousers, ready to
the way
wank.
he lets it drop down. It's not just suddenly cut to he's in his pants.
Yeah.
He lets it fall down like a child.
Yeah.
And then does a sort of limbering up of the wrist and a blowing of the hand to sort of warm himself up for his wankathon.
Okay, so this is a marrying of dialogue and the performance, but his phone call thing of the drilling, the facial expressions on that, pull that up to an 11.
I mean, it's a complete act out of a gag, isn't it? He's completely in his own head, and everything that Richie's doing is selling it to you, and you're laughing every step of the way.
Eddie in the background as well, just trying to ignore him, and just slowly turning around, like you're annoying me, but he can't. What are you doing?
Fingers in his ears, trying to block him out.
Apocalypse. Now this one does have quite a few in. Shoots a thug in the eye, leans on a patient in the hospital and blood comes out, pushes a man in a wheelchair down a lift shaft, and obviously ends on a kick in the bollocks. I think the biggest one for me is Edward Hitler come down here at once.
Yeah, piano
crash. That is one of my favourite moments in the all of them. Just the timing of it is sublime, and the fact it's crashed onto where Richie's been hiding for the last 3 days as well. It's so beautiful, all of it, the way it's been written.
But Richie leaning on the patient in the hospital
it's almost murder, isn't it? It's one of the only times I think it's certainly suggested that guy's dead.
But yeah, I mean, I think we went over it at the time we did the episode, but it's never really sat right with me, the amount of blood that you do see in that. I know it's comedy blood, and you don't think he's actually leaning on a basically corpse now.
Do you think it skirts the line between comedy and gore there?
Yeah, I think it does a little bit, but especially when it then goes in his face.
Spurt's just a little bit out of time as well when it then squirts.
Yeah. The more I watch it, the more I do appreciate that one. But when I was watching it when I was younger, I never used to really laugh at it. But now I'm like, actually, that's really well done.
Okay, so next one is obviously Sup. What comes to mind there, physical comedy-wise?
Another one of my favourite moments is the pickled onion sandwich, where he's set up the fall that is meant to be Eddie's. Yeah. It's meant to be that Eddie will come, sit down on a chair and fall.
Yeah,
and it ends up being Rick that gets on the chair that after
okay.
being hit in the face by the roof, the trapdoor, and he's like, take a load off, sit down here, and then he gets
it's not an impressive fall, but it's because of all the build up to it.
Oh, I was going to say that it's a very impressive fall because there's no break in the speed at which he's moving. He's almost falling down into the chair, expecting the chair to take his weight. The chair moves and he just keeps going without changing speed. The chair may as well almost not be there. Yeah. He may as well just be falling onto the floor.
What I love about that is also the dim-wit, isn't it, of Richie? Like, he's set up that chair. He knows that is going to collapse, but in the moment, he's so stupid that he's got his nose broken. He's forgotten, and he's like, "Thanks, mate," and sits down.
And then Eddie doesn't even react to that as well. He just carries on with his sandwich. honourable mention to Eddie being knocked off the roof because his legs go right up. But for me, is the seagull shitting in Richie's face.
That's a wonderful bit of physical comedy, isn't it? It's the fool being crapped on by...
And he smiles because he thinks he's won. He thinks, oh, it is rain, just in this little area, in a little jet of warm rain.
For me, it's Mr. 55p introducing Richie's face to the counter in the shop.
Oh, God.
It's like that guy is some sort of ex-SAS guy or something because he does that move really like, yeah, okay, you know, like he had a bit of skill there.
Just no nonsense, isn't it? And then the noise that is made by Rick's head bouncing off it, and then just the "see you, Eddie." It's just topped off.
Bye, John. That's a good reveal as well, isn't it? But that's not physical. That's written.
So, accident. Obviously, the title would suggest there's lots of examples in this, and in fact, there is. Richie's leg gets broken and is bending the wrong way, and then, of course, leads on to breaking a second one through flying down the stairs at speed in a wheelchair. And then crashing through a wooden door.
There's something funny, even if that happened in real life, someone broke their leg or in a wheelchair, and you'd be like, oh, that's bad. And then a few hours later, they broke the other leg. You'd smirk at it, I think.
Oh, yeah. But it's the fact that they're indestructible, aren't they? Because, you know, most people wouldn't be able to survive the pain of that. But, you know, Richie's back later on at his party, you know, all that kind of thing. Completely unfazed, but that image of him shooting down the stairs and into the toilet is incredible, isn't it? It's interesting, isn't it? Because, again, it's the attitude, I think, because, you know, you mentioned, there's a bit of snobbery for certain things, like 3 men in a tin bath going down a hill from That's Some Wine. That's speaking to the same thing within you, isn't it, really? The idea of people, careering down a hill and into calamity. But Richie getting that done to him is much, much more hilarious to me than it is those characters in, I don't even know what they're all called.
Compo.
Clegg and someone else, and Gromit. Is it because in Last of Summer Wine, because they keep reusing that same joke, though? So it's become a cliche. It's almost become a bit like...
Actually, is this the same sort of thing as like Captain Pugwash, we all remember it wrong? Do they actually fall down a hill in a tin bath every episode? Because I can't imagine that.
Not every
Why
episode.
would they go up a fucking hill with a bath?
Probably not. And it's probably been informed by things like I've seen a spoof version with Matt Lucas and someone else in going down a hill.
Sure.
Because they're spoofing the same convention of, is it the Mandela effect? Do we all remember it, but it only happened once?
Yeah.
But it is interesting, isn't it, that an entire show can be summed up by one particular image, and usually it will be physical comedy. So if you ask anyone to talk about maybe one particular thing in Bottom, it probably is the frying pan to the face, isn't it? You know?
And yet, Last of Summer Wine was 99% old men standing around walking in fields and being incredibly fucking boring.
Yeah, exactly.
And occasionally trying to goose Nora Batty.
But well, she'd be beating him away with her broom and all that kind of stuff, wouldn't she?
If she was just horrified and got assaulted, that's not funny, but it's her being...
She turns up at the police station sobbing.
Yeah, some like old men in sitcoms and stuff have the kind of sexual proclivity as a ventriloquist dummy, that sort of thing, where it's just full on filth, and for some reason it's okay.
Well, it's not okay, is it? That's the point. They're breaking social convention.
Allow it. We don't see them as a villain.
No, we're not horrified by it because it's played.
Take a Benny Hill routine where he's chasing women around at double speed with yakety sax playing, slow it down to normal speed and remove the music.
Absolutely.
And then add screams.
I hope someone has done that on YouTube. Let's look at that right. Do you ever see, I think it was a sketch on Alexi Sale's sketch show where they had Ben Elton doing a Benny Hill
chasing them around.
Thatcher, the 80s.
Okay, so Series 2, Digger. This one has a reasonable amount as well. Anything leap to mind for you guys?
Oh, well, I'm in the fight through the curtain with,
back in the kitchen.
And he ends up in the wrong place, unexpected.
So that's what's expected, but it is almost like a deconstruction of television.
Yeah.
We'll pull back. Oh, wait, we're in the wrong position. We've totally done the wrong thing.
The logic of it, no sense at all, isn't it? Because until that point, what space was he existing in? Like, he pulls back and it's like he didn't exist until it's revealed, the visual gag there. And that, hang on, I'm not where I thought I would be. You knew where you were. What do you mean?
That's exactly it. And I think as well as the horror side of it, it's apparently magicians use the same tricks as a comedian to surprise you as they do, a magician does to astonish. So it's that idea of people not being in the place you expect them to be when you pull back and reveal. But yeah, that one stands out. The mashed potato, the head in the mash.
Yeah,
the stab in the head with the fork, due to the reaction and the sound effect, it's particularly vicious and funny. Eddie, I think I must be hallucinating. Well, we'll find out.
Okay.
Thunk. But something for me that's great physical comedy in this is just Rick's reaction to it's fish poo, Your Highness. His face, the way he's retching and sticking his tongue out, that blackened tongue.
And then, of course, as we mentioned earlier, the build-up to getting Natasha undressed in his
Yeah.
bedroom. And
I think all of his how horny and childlike and nervous he is.
Well, and actually, thinking about it, there's a piece of physical comedy that presumably exists on film that we've been denied in this episode because Ed By told us that he had to cut it out, which is the original cut had a, not inference, but it basically had Richie coming in his pants, and they had to cut that particular shot, didn't they?
It's still there, sort of, isn't it? But it's not. It's not a visual gag. That's just.
But of course, Richie ends up saying, "I'm going to have to go and change my pajama bottoms."
What would the visual
gonna have
gag
to
have been?
change
A
my-
close up on his crotch and seeing a stain appear. Or
Oh no! I
something?
think
What would
it
his
would.
face,
I think
guess?
it would be played out on his face. We'd see his O face.
Have we ever seen that? Because we've seen him kind of fucking a goldfish bowl and stuff, but that's the closest to it, I think, of him actually enjoying.
He never reached where he was going to with it. Yeah.
Well, it probably would be, too much for the BBC even after the watershed.
I think
Fuck you, Yentob.
Honourable mention for the heart defibrillator brain operation.
Like that's the comedy overstatement of the reaction. The way Aid sort of throws his hands up in the air is very similar to when Rick is on stage getting kicked in the bollocks and he throws his arms and legs up each time. It's to let the entire room know this is a big comedic reaction.
And it's the punchline to the whole episode as well.
Yeah.
It's
Culture.
absolutely full of them.
Really is, isn't
Custody pants, that's all in the physical thing because it's not actually really that heavy, probably. Well, it probably actually is more heavy than a normal pair of pants.
it definitely looks quite, the way Rick's selling it,
Yeah.
it's clearly like a big plastic tub, isn't it, that he's got around him for his undies. And then, of course, we mention it every single episode, probably, don't we? But the chest fight.
Yeah, because it's one fight with several moments in it, isn't it? It's why it's so to say the fight is it's underselling, isn't it?
It's
Even the
choreographed.
toes is good.
Yeah.
The umbrella, I think
Yeah.
that's a really nice visual
Yeah.
gag because it's the stab R opening of the umbrella, which actually wouldn't make it stab in more, but it just visually looks impressive, and then that it's left the tip in him, whatever. And I think my favourite though is just the head being smashed in with the fridge door, and you see Richie's reaction to it with his arms just like going up a little bit less, and then it's got like he's been knocked out
As he's gradually losing consciousness.
Yeah.
Eddie smashing the TV over Richie's head is just their version of a custard pie in the face, isn't it? It's attacking someone with an object in a humiliating manner.
An everyday object that we recognise not being used for the purpose it is intended.
That's exactly it, isn't it? It's using objects for violence that you wouldn't generally tend to in a civilised household. But I actually was thinking about it, like if Rick and Aid ever did the pie in the face gag, and I can't think of a time when it was recorded, but it says on Wikipedia that in the pre-record of the Let's Dance for Comic Relief, when they first had Rick come on with the frying pan, apparently in the pre-record, the rehearsal, he did do a pie in the face.
Oh, really? Okay. Oh, man, I wonder if that exists on film somewhere. Burglary.
The burglar. What don't they do to him?
The pencil up the nose, I think, is my stand-up moment there. There's just an angle gang. It's almost like a magic trick.
When I was thinking of physical stuff for this episode, the thing that came to mind instantly was lower yourself evenly and it'll easily hold the weight. And I think that and the burglar stuff is so entrenched in your mind that you forget things like do your balls hang low and pulling Eddie up the stairs.
Yeah, because that's early on in the episode, but I love that.
Yeah, that's
the
very cartoony.
The pulley system that he's already got ready.
Not to mention, of course, actually the way Aid plays it, Eddie returning home completely pissed, playing the drunk very well.
That's, I guess, commedia dell'arte and influences just having the exaggeration, the body movements of. I think Richie insinuates that he stinks of booze, but I mean, he's told that, but you can tell straight away the comedy cartoon drunk, like like
I mean,
why do they hiccups when they drinking those things?
Rick's face when he's at the ironing board waiting for him to come in.
Yeah.
What time do you call this? Like that goes round as a meme everywhere, doesn't it? Rick's expectant face. The sellotaping the burglar to the ceiling.
Well, the whacking him down, I think, is quite funny. It's not often that it's someone else other than Richie and Eddie getting hit that's that funny.
Usually in Bottom, you see an overstated reaction to an attack, to a hit. When the burglar comes into the flat and hits Eddie while they're both staring at the ceiling, Eddie gives an understated reaction, which is he doesn't react to it at all.
Yeah, delayed.
Yeah, it's the cartoon hit, 3, 2, 1, then fall over.
It's like gravity not working on them. It's that same sort
Yeah.
of concept, isn't it? What is it that he's so tough and hard that he can accept that?
He's drunk.
I always thought it was that he's just too stupid.
Yeah,
for,
I think it's so slow.
Yeah.
It's like the reflex test with the hammer and the knee thing. Just if you were dumb, dim-witted, it would take a long time. I think that happens with Homer, doesn't it? Knocks and then you see like a day pass. Same gag. It's being slow, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's their brain so slow it doesn't even register pain.
So Parade.
I guess Robert Llewellyn's reactions to the leg being pulled. It's painful enough for those horrific facial expressions, but doesn't wake him up. That is gold.
And Parade, isn't there, when they actually sell punching Mrs. Spudgun?
Yes, Chief Inspector Grobbelaar punches her in the face, doesn't he?
Which shouldn't play all right, but it does.
I think it's because she's been quite vulgar and
Oh, yeah.
annoying the whole episode.
Yeah,
She's not
exactly.
just a woman.
Equal opportunities
Yeah,
violence.
her and the charity collector in the Lady Natasha episode, let me take your coat. They're the only instances of women getting abused in this. I use abused in its loosest possible sense there, obviously.
I forgot that was that episode because that is one of my moments that I think stand out. The charity worker, when Eddie knocks her down the stairs like a proper mallet, doesn't he? Hit her on the head. It's not very much. Donk to a woman as well.
But she hits back, doesn't she? That's why that works.
I
She
guess
does.
so.
Holy.
Obviously, the entire setup to Santa coming in the room that Eddie set up the booby trap for, and Richie ended up getting strung up.
Whole opening sequence is
So
fantastic.
where does that kind of stuff originate from? The contraptions, the Wallace and Gromit things.
I genuinely think that it's cartoon, isn't it?
You're right.
But
It's the Acme equipment being used, isn't it?
But one thing that knocks over another thing, which does a lever, that sort of thing, precisely. With the little homemade alarm system that Eddie's put, the effort that would actually have to be done for that to go, that is funny as well.
Yeah.
Because just thinking that it all pays off. If it just misfires something, it's nothing, is it?
But the brilliant thing is that it doesn't actually deter Richie at all. Obviously, once he is brought down, he just comes in anyway and wakes up Eddie. He thinks
it's
he's
still
broken
limping.
his leg.
Yeah.
I think him lopping his finger off is one of the strongest visual gags in that
I would
episode.
say that is top 3 in all of Bottom. That finger coming off is so iconic. His facial expression really sells it, having Eddie react to it or not react to it.
One that comes to mind for me is one that it's props working for you, but it's a great visual gag, which is serving the potatoes. How many potatoes? Well, after they've had the argument, serves it, smashes the plate. That's what it tells you all you need to know.
Absolutely, and the same with the pudding going on fire, and and the object not being the size you expect it to be when they reveal the turkey. It's completely shriveled to nothing.
Yeah, with a little bit of smoke.
I quite like, it's almost a throwaway thing when Richie's going to carve the turkey and Dave Hedgehog has to hold up a baking tray thing to use as a makeshift shield, and it's really not much is made of it, but that's a very good bit of physical comedy from Christopher Ryan.
The Woman in Common episode, Sout.
What are your favourite bits, Paul? Go on.
I know there's lots of fighting in it, but my favourite bit is literally the twisting back and forth of the dart in Richie's hand and then pulling out for the rock to then fall on his foot. It's so perfect, the whole thing.
Yeah, for some reason you don't see the rock coming.
Yeah. Richie's foot isn't in shot when they're twisting it, and Rick plays it really well. There's a good sound effect, sort of clicky sound, and then when the dart goes, I don't know how they did it. Presumably he's just holding the rock and he let go subtly, and the camera moves perfectly with the rock down onto the foot, and it works so well. How about you guys? Anything else in that one?
The Flasher
watch it for a while.
getting things zipped onto his penis, I think it's quite good.
Gets a tent pole in the eye as well, doesn't he, Rick, in that?
Tent pole,
Like,
he does.
yeah.
Falls onto the tent
An
pole.
impale sort of thing. There's some moves in Bottom which would be a fatality or whatever, and that's one of the many. Hole! What about that one? The one where they're confined to one small area for the entire episode. Surely can't have much physical stuff going on that one.
It's another one of my top 3, which of course, I think everyone remembers the carriage actually falling when Rick says, "Don't you dare call me overweight young man."
And the dummy, you like that, don't you? You think it adds to it?
Oh yeah, I just think it's
Yeah,
Oh.
that's my favourite bit of physical comedy in this episode. It has the same sort of structure and setup as Come Down Here at Once. The line is, "Don't you call me overweight young man," instantly sits down, cut to the other shot of it going. It's just so well timed, it's so well set up, it's perfect.
For me, it's him stomping out the fire and falling through and then being pulled up by his hair. It's the hair bit's the topper for me.
Yeah, there's something quite horrible and vicious about being pulled by your hair, isn't it? Especially if it's to pull your entire weight up.
Doesn't it Reggie get a brick in the face from down below as well?
He does.
And then there's Aid fannying around on top of the Ferris wheel, like going back and forth. That's a lot of really brilliant physical comedy. The slapstick element of the carriage falling is definitely stand out.
Okay, so what about in Terror, the Halloween episode?
Well, it's the fiery farts stands out, I guess.
The thing that leaps to mind for me is every time Richie is wielding the cattle prod and tries to use it, it's in Rick Mayall's performance of shitting himself.
Absolutely. And then obviously there's the slitting of the wrists
And
as
that
well
bit
from
you don't
Eddie.
like, do you? You find that squeamish from memory, is that right?
Yeah, I did at the time, and I still have never really absolutely laughed.
You're right. That's the one injury they've done in this that looks
quite real.
realistic, and therefore it loses some of the comedy in it, doesn't it?
But then that's interesting, is it? Because it's that idea of like what does make you laugh and what doesn't. Because we know that it isn't real, don't we? When we're watching it,
Yeah.
and then that idea of you setting up stunts and all that kind of thing. Like it's just an interesting one. Because the finger spurting is very similar.
But I'll tell you what the difference between the two is. I think that this makes the difference to why one is funny and one looks horrible. When the finger's spurting, the blood spurts off, you don't see where it lands. When Eddie cuts his wrist, it goes all over his face. And that adds a sort of horrific, gory element to it. It makes it more like a horror film.
It does make it more like a horror film.
Do you think it's also that Richie didn't intend to cut his finger off? So it's actually an accident.
I think the blood that happens almost in the background as well, and it's a timing joke as well, isn't it? Because he's told, "Oh, open up a vein," and then it's on the reveal that it's not the devil. What? And then the blood, oh, it's too late. I like that. I think that's a personal taste thing. I do think it's meant to be funny, and I find that funny.
It's not unfunny, but I have never laughed at it in the same way, because I think the key thing is that when Richie cuts his finger off, it's an accident. With that, he purposely slits his wrist.
Also, in that, the finger is severed off camera, whereas when Eddie cuts his wrist, you see the violent, jagged action. You definitely feel it more. Like, you can see the movement more.
It's more like Reservoir Dogs, where you remember the scene of the ear coming off much more visually, but it's not.
Even though the camera actually pans off of it.
Another standout physical moment is just all in the reaction of the sprouts going into the mouth. Like, you can just obviously some very normal edible food that he's putting it in, and it's all in the facial expression.
Next episode in Series 3, Break. Not really anyone's favourite, but it does have some good physical moments in it.
I've got a lot of affection for Break the more you kind of rewatch episodes. And does he run through the wall?
He does. This is the I'm in the pube with the holiday monkey, and he runs through the bookcase.
He runs through the patio window thing after running off the treadmill as well. And one of the most famous physical things as well, the chainsaw legs.
Yes,
the bit where he replaces his legs with chainsaws and walks around on a pair of chainsaws. Remember that?
As we said at the time, this is where it sort of went quite cartoonish in that there was no real consequences, or things were reset in real time. It wasn't that we'd get to the end of the episode and then next week everything will be back to normal. In this case, it was, we'll just fix things mid-episode.
It's literally not that they grow back, he sews them on.
The physical humour in Series 3, I think that's one of the things that we obviously, when we went through, we were honest about how we felt about a lot of the scenes in Series 3, and I know a lot of listeners didn't agree with us, and that is absolutely perfectly fine. We had a few people saying, that's the whole point, it's much more physical, and in that way, I hold my hands up and say, yeah, actually they were just doing bolder, different things, but it's just not quite packing the same punch as it did in Series 1 and 2. All the scenarios that they're setting up seemed a little bit too exaggerated, but I totally get it if people actually do think Series 3 is one of the best, because there are so many amazing setups, the whole visual payoffs.
The whole liposuction sequence in this episode is pretty good.
Isn't the Des Lynam's Todger under the fridge?
The fridge falling on his head.
Yeah.
That is this one.
I always thought the end of that one, him having a kick in the bollocks when he's just had a fridge hit on his head, is a little bit underwhelming. Because that's the fridge on the head could have been the
What about Doe, the pub scene with the fixing their buzzers?
It's one of the few times again that it's other members getting the violence.
Doe is the episode that when I describe elements of cartoonish violence in Series 3, the things that come to mind are Richie having his crotch set on fire outside Eddie's room and then tumbling down the stairs to fuck the goldfish bowl. That and the snooker cue in the eye through the keyhole from Eddie's room. Mm-hmm. So yeah, you're right. The stuff in the pub is very memorable, but for me, it's always those bits in those opening minutes.
The teeth being knocked out on the bar, like the smash, and then spitting out, which was done before in the live episode, I believe.
On the live show. Yeah, it was something that they had basically taken from the live.
I'm sure they'd done it before and something else as well. There's black eyes, lumps on head, and teeth missing. It's like kind of the cartoon Beano-y thing of someone been beaten up, missing teeth. In reality, it's horrific, and it's like, got the implications of getting all that fixed and stuff, the nightmare, but their teeth grow back, don't they? No, they mention thank God for grandfather's forces or something.
So here's probably where the difference is. Spitting out one tooth is tragic. Spitting out 50 teeth, which is impossible to have, becomes funny. Penultimate one of Series 3, Finger, the one where they go to the Marveloso Splendido Hotello.
I like them falling down the stairs after Act Natural or something. What's it?
It's something like Act Normal, something like that. Which is a good
instant.
It's a good setup for it, and they plummet down the stairs.
Yeah. And then Eddie dressed in the woman's costume.
It's a crossover, isn't it? It's a visual gag. It's so annoying that America think, British humour is just men dressed as women. No, it's not. And then, it's in everything.
Yeah, but there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, Monty Python did that. I don't have any quibbles about men dressing in drag for humour.
For some reason, often there's a character that finds them unreasonably attractive for what's going on.
Yeah,
the barman
happens in Blackadder when George dresses as a lady and Melchett wants to marry him.
Then in Blackadder with Flashheart and Baldrick as the bridesmaid, and Percy
and Baldrick. Yeah.
Hello. They do it twice, don't they? Basically. Yeah.
The thing that comes to mind in Finger for me is the car driving sequence with the over-the-top background. It's taking that background projection that we are used to from older films, but doing it in a really outlandish cartoon element, and that makes it quite funny.
It feels like an old silent film almost, doesn't it? Because of the scenery racing behind them. It's so ludicrous. And the tights on their head as well is another big visual gag. Them one trying to go one way, one going the other way.
The neck crick of that is quite brutal, isn't it?
Finally, in Series 3, episode Carnival, which of course has lots of hilarious video accidents that they set.
I love Carnival, and I mean, we've been building to it, but my ultimate favourite moment is obviously Rick falling down the stairs as Kilroy.
And into the toilet,
And into the toilet. But that moment where his face goes and he first trips.
It reminds me of Alan Rickman when in Die Hard, when he dies, when he falls.
Oh, yeah.
Because you know the story of this. It's the camera's right on his face, and they're like, okay, on 3 is when we're going to drop you. And they drop him on 1. So he's like, there's a blind panic in his eyes. And Richie, when he starts falling, does look like it's the beginning of an outtake.
Yeah, it looks like Rick isn't expecting it. He sells it brilliantly. And then obviously ending up in the toilet is a great payoff. And Rick did that fall himself, didn't he?
He did the fall, although I think you can tell the person upside down in the toilet is not him. And this was the episode that had something that approached a repetition of the Towering Inferno, which was Rick running in and setting Eddie on fire and then running off.
That whole "you've been framed" send-up thing, I love that. The 2 takes of it as well, the in his eye and then do it again. I really like the subgenre or something of people badly acting in something. So like Eddie pretending to be a housewife. Oh dear, da 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 da, and then the real character moments actually coming out, but him trying to play this housewife. Why do you have to be a housewife while doing this, Eddie? You could have just been yourself and still happened. No, I'm going to do it this way.
Where this episode leads to, with Rick and Aid at that point intending for it to be the last series, was of course killing off Richie and Eddie, thus coming to the rule of the comedian is immortal until he's not.
It felt very real, even though obviously there's blood packs going off and it is cartoonish. But I remember being really quite affected by the end of it. I certainly didn't laugh.
I think that was a deliberate choice on Rick and Aid's part and on the directing at the time, in that we're going to make this look real, so it packs a punch and makes you think that's it, they're dead, they're not coming back.
But in the cartoon way, they could have been brought back because they die at the end of Hole when they fall off the hand of God, and that's another great visual gag. But it felt very real. If you played it a different way, it could have almost been like the ending of Blackadder, couldn't it? They'd slowed it down and gone into like.
I was about to say that, they should slow it down and then fade to poppies. What about Guest House Paradiso? As we discussed at the time, I think has some great physical bits. The opening of Guest House Paradiso, the opening 5-6 minutes, whatever it is, plays almost entirely like a silent film, and it's cut between two very good sequences. You have Aid as Eddie on the motorbike going through a series of obstacles to try and get home, and you have Richie doing a series of silent gags, picking out the comedy in the first 5 minutes. Could play anywhere in the world without any sound. Richie choosing from a series of identical cardigans, then putting his name badge on and piercing, and not just getting a little bit of blood, but it's almost like there's an
He's got a
artery.
white shirt on as well, doesn't he? So it's the
But-
kitchen fight's very good.
I mean, the kitchen fight, I think, in terms of physicality and production value, it's up there and competes with the chess fight and the bathroom fight. I think if you had to choose the best 3 fights from bottom, it would be those 3. That one from Guest House Paradiso, and then the other 2.
It's difficult because whenever I do think of bottom, I think of series 1 to 3. But it is a very, very, very strong choreographed fight scene. That
And it's shot differently. As you see close-ups of a pair of swollen bollocks getting kicked more and more again.
So what about the live shows then?
I think the continual bollock kicking, is that All Look Knackers? I can't remember. It's in Bottom Live 1, where it's kick. Each time Rick is doing the reaction to it. I think he does it about 30 times.
Sure.
I think that was one of the quiz questions on the day. It was about 33 times or something like that.
Yeah.
The Special K brick, the swap out of that, I think it's really good. The teeth again.
So the live shows impress you in a different way because they were done in front of the live audience and there was nowhere for them to hide. And I mean, I think we have quoted it before, but Aid said no one takes a punch like Rick Mail. The choreography that has gone into the live shows is somehow even more impressive, isn't it, than say watching Guest House Paradiso. It's they're retaking it. There's one moment to get these things right, otherwise
It's return
you
to
can't
the
redo it.
Dangerous Brothers style with their origins just on a stage kicking the fuck out of each other. I like the cricket bat use in the prison scene where it's hitting the bollocks, whacking the face, hitting the bollocks, whacking the face. I remember watching that in slow motion on my VHS that could frame by frame over static. Oh, look at this, it's brilliant.
Ultimately, Rick and Aid really, they are representative of modern physical comedy, aren't they? They really are such a great example of it. As we sort of come to our conclusion here, I think the work of Rick and Aid should really be held in the same sort of reverence that people hold for the stars of cinema, such as Harold Lloyd, Laurel and Hardy, Buster Keaton. Rick and Aid built on what their predecessors did, and they emulated it and they bettered it, but they don't get the same credit that those earlier guys do, partly because Rick and Aid were competing against other entertainment that was available in the 20th and 21st century, partly because it's TV rather than film, and partly because they styled it in a cartoonish way, and also because they played vile, unlikable characters. That had people sneering a lot of the time, when actually they should have been adding them to the same halls of fame that we add Laurel and Hardy to, and those other people too.
This is exactly why we're calling the book that we're writing the cult sitcom. We're fully aware that every one of our listeners is brilliant. You've got a fantastic taste in comedy, but not everybody shares it, do they? Not everyone that you talk to has heard of Bottom. Not everyone that you talk to now has even heard of The Young Ones
Less
or Rick
and
Mail.
less and less every day.
That's one of the reasons why, obviously, we've said it before we started the podcast, and we want to keep talking about Bottom because we want to celebrate it, because it really deserves it. And I can't understand why anyone wouldn't agree, but all I can think is that not as many people actually have watched it growing up, or go back to it. You say, people say, oh, I wasn't born when that came out or whatever, so that means you're not going to watch it. Why? Because I watched Monty Python. I wasn't born when that came out, but I love Monty Python.
No one says that about Monty Python. I wasn't born when Monty Python came out.
It's literally everyone who's a comedy fan should know about Monty Python and Fawlty Towers and everything. They were all made before I was born, but I love them. And when you watch things for the first time, they're new to you, aren't they? It doesn't matter. Talking about slapstick, Monty Python, I mean, the fish slapping dance, and you want to look up pie slapping in faces. They do a brilliant skit on that from, I think it was the Secret Policeman's Ball, and then again in the Hollywood Bowl one. They kind of deconstruct the idea of the pie in the face and, go through all the different ways in which it can happen, and it all kind of befalls Terry Jones. But I digress. Rick and Aid obviously took all these influences, didn't they? And then created what we all know and love as what we feel is the best sitcom ever made. Will there be someone who comes up behind them who can make as good a physical comedy? I don't think so.
I don't see how it can be topped with. It just needs to be a new element to it, something, a surreal element, a fourth wall breaking thing. I don't know. I can't think.
But is it that actually, the way in which like silent film and slapstick and all those things kind of grow through the ages, is it actually becoming a bit of a thing of the past, or do you think there will be a cyclical resurgence of it? I mean, because there's a lot of clowning that still obviously goes on, like certainly at the Edinburgh Fringe.
I would
live
say
shows,
clowning's getting a resurgence.
I think
actually.
it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
But so why do you think Rick and Aid particularly are to be given the crown of the best ever physical comedians though? Do you think it's because of everything that came before them and then they utilised that to inform their act? Or?
I mean, there's the phrase standing on the shoulders of giants, and they did to an extent, but they took what previous people had done and they ran with it to the nth degree, and they pushed boundaries and pushed themselves, and no one else was doing it. And even from the 80s up through the 90s when they were doing Bottom, you didn't see an example anywhere else of people doing this kind of thing. As we said, the only other example you could see of people doing anything even close was Jackass, and that was where the entire gag was that they were doing something dangerous.
Yeah, this is it. I think the genius of Rick and Aid is the fact that they took something that was so inherently, you know, musical, vaudeville, all those things, silent film, and they made it feel fresh and new because they used various different factors within the writing as well to just create comedy that's got lots of different elements that make it perfection. And that's why obviously we're going to be doing different themes that run through Bottom.
You think it's interesting how the performances of the Dangerous Brothers, physically, all the stunts and the fighting and the violent stuff, very similar to Richie and Eddie, but the personas of them two is just, look at this, look at do this. But the sort of melancholy, bored, tragic element that they put into Richie and Eddie makes it, I guess, if you're around violent stuff, that starts losing its impact.
Exactly. That's where take those violent aspects and the great physical moments, but also then add a fantastic acting performance on there as well.
And characters that are well-rounded, you know, although they're absurd.
Yeah.
Richie and Eddie have got a backstory.
Yeah.
You know, you're invested in their attitudes.
I mean, the
and what's
backstory
happening.
changes episode to episode, but sure, there's a lot of layers there going on, and very well put. Just because it's absurd doesn't mean it's not well-rounded.
Right, what's next week?
Next week we're going to be doing Class, which will overlap with Poverty, obviously the influences that Rick and Aid had through other comedies that they watched growing up, and where Richie and Eddie sit within, you know, middle, lower working class.
Being bottom of the heap is a recurring phrase that comes up in interviews, and yes, a huge element of bottom is class and
a British comedy as a whole, so we'll be looking at a
snobbishness.
few different examples as we have done today through, you know, British and American comedy. And
would Mrs. Bouquet have ever beat the shit out of her husband with a frying pan?
I think she probably did behind closed doors.
Yeah, I'd love to have seen her.
She probably went at him with a strap on several times. So that will be our next episode in this 30th anniversary series celebrating Bottom.
If anyone has any comments or wants to ask any questions or say anything about what we've been talking about today or what we might go through in future episodes
or
of Talking
book.
Bottom, or indeed the book, if you've got ideas of things that you'd like to have us research and look into, because we are furiously writing it at the moment, email in to 11mafekkingparade@gmail.com, or you can follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram, all at Talking Bottom. So give us your thoughts, and if you want to give us some of your cash and you want to read the book that we're writing, you can go to unbound.com and search for Talking Bottom, or if you go to any of our social media sites, you can see us heavily promoting it on there. But again, we just want to thank everyone who's already backed our book, because it is a crowdfunding campaign and you can still pledge and get yourselves a copy of the book when it does come out. We don't know the date yet, but we will be informing you through social media. We're over 125% funded, and in fact we've done better than that, but every percent still matters because it will unlock extra pledge levels.
Next chapter, the A to Z of Bottom, is something that I think that's when we reach 175%.
Anyway, thanks for listening everyone.
See you next time.
Bye.
Bye.